In this exercise, we're going to work through the conceptual massing model that we have here in Revit and begin to work through the process of getting a rough elevation put together of this portion of the train station. So to start with, we want to go look at our materials and begin to set up a new, or actually not a new material, but an addition to the material palette that we already have. So if we look at this file in its realistic kind of view, you'll note that right now these don't have any material applied to them. So we're going to do that really quick. I'm going to go to Edit and Place. I'm going to select this base piece. And let's move that from the default material type to masonry dry stack, which is the material that we built in the last exercise. And so you can see that we now have some stonework on that surface. I've actually already changed some of the other surfaces to a different type. But if I start to look at that in an elevation, an elevation is going to be a hidden line type. And I don't have a material at all applied as a hatch pattern. So we need to first start by building a hatch pattern, get that working, and then we're actually going to make some edits to this so that we can have some different materials along the surface and actually have that look correct with a little bit of additional detail with some precast pieces. So let's dive into adding a new piece to that material, to that dry stack masonry material, which will be a hatch pattern. So Revit doesn't ship, at least not that I've found, with a decent stone hatch pattern, which is kind of a bummer. But on Revit City, there's a great hatch pattern, and we're going to load that up. I'm going to walk you through the process of doing that, loading up a custom built hatch pattern. So I'm going to go to, if you remember, what we used to build this appearance in terms of rendering was we added a new appearance asset, which was this dry stone. And now what we need to do is underneath the graphics tab, that's where we need to add the surface patterns or the hatch patterns. So underneath pattern, I'm going to click right here where it says none. And if you notice, there's really nothing listed yet for stone other than this guy, which I'm actually going to bring in. Let's go ahead and delete it. That's going to be the new pattern that I bring in. Now I need to bring that in underneath drafting type. That's the only way I've been able to get this particular pattern to load. So I'm going to select drafting, the drafting radio button, new, custom, and import. So to import this, I've already downloaded it and I've saved that to my project directory. It's right here off of Revit City. This one is called Weathered Edge Limestone. And it's a .pat file. So I'm going to say import, and right now I'm just going to start by selecting the defaults. So this is assuming a 1-to-1 on the hatch pattern scale. I'm going to say OK, and right away I know that there's a little bit of a problem when I look at the preview for that hatch pattern right here and I look at the scale of it. I'm going to go ahead and go through the process and we'll see how it looks. So I'm going to say OK again on any hatch pattern that I use. This is a personal preference, but I really hate using a hatch pattern with a black line. In my opinion, a hatch pattern is usually secondary information. I want it to be background in the drawing, so I'll usually set it to this sort of medium gray. I also want to go ahead and put in a cut pattern for the stonework, and I'm just going to use a for right now, I'm just going to go ahead and use the dense sand. Either that, or we can also use a diagonal small. We'll go ahead and use the diagonal small for it right now. And again, at the same time, I want to set that to a medium gray. So let's go ahead and say done and OK. And you can see what's happened is we have the hatch pattern. It is applied, but it's enormous. So it's really not what I'm looking for at all. So let's go back and let's edit that material again. Masonry dry stack. Now, unfortunately, I haven't found a way to edit the scale. If I come in and click edit, there's no way to sort of reactivate the scale. So what I've typically do in this case is I'm going to go re-import, select, and say open, and now I have the opportunity to reestablish the scale. And I know just from experience that a lot of imported hatch patterns, there's an inch to feet translation problem. So if I pop up in my calculator and I just do a simple 1 divided by 12, I get this 0.0833 number. 0.0833. That is the number in terms of converting what the number 1 equaling 1 foot versus 1 equaling an inch. It kind of resolves that problem, that scale problem, from a typical hatch pattern to Revit, where the number 1 is going to actually be 1 inch as a scale unit. So I'm going to say OK to that, and I can already see that I'm getting a little bit better preview in terms of the fill pattern dialog box. I'm going to say OK, done, and OK. And I'm seeing something to a much, much better scale. Now the next thing I want to do is actually add a little bit of detail into this in terms of what would be, how this would actually be built with sort of a precast stone piece. So I'm going to go ahead and select this and say edit extrusion. And I'm going to go ahead and inset this piece 4 inches here, here, and here, because that is going to be the amount of thickness, or the thickness of the precast concrete pieces that I want to run over the top of that. So that's now officially smaller. Now I want to use the exact same depth, the exact same reference plane and everything for this piece. So I'm going to go ahead and copy it. And the easiest way to do that is actually in the floor plan view. So I'm just going to say copy. I'm just going to move it here. Then I'm going to move it right back. So I have 2 identical objects in the exact same location. So now I can select one and say edit extrusion, and this time I'm actually going to go ahead and offset 4 inches up, over, and up. I'm going to offset this piece at the edge of the bench 2 inches over, start trimming and deleting. And I'm going to do the same thing with this guy. I'm going to offset it 2 inches. And I can delete this piece. And I'm going to go ahead and add in a little bit of a reveal detail at these locations. I could take the time to perhaps model each one of those separate, but nobody wants to watch that. So let's just add in a little bit of a reveal detail at this location. So to do that, I'm going to pull this line up, and I'm going to offset it 1/2 inch. And a 1/2 inch down. Running the split command. And the trim command. To get a little bit of a reveal here, and I want to do the exact same thing at this location. So I'm going to do another offset. And now I've got a couple of reveals built in, so it's, those will show up in the render. Won't look exactly right on the edge, but it's going to look pretty close. So you can see it's built those the exact same way across. But now I want to take this particular surface, and rather than that being masonry dry stack, we will set that to be precast concrete. Now if you note, I've already gone into my precast concrete setting and I've given that particular material a hatch pattern as well. I've used the dense sand hatch and a concrete hatch for the cut pattern. Again, I have both of those set to gray to start getting that kind of a feel to that particular piece. Now I should be doing that with this as well, but again I want to go ahead and move forward with the rest of this tutorial. So again, we're building an elevation, adding a little bit of detail so that the elevation reads correctly. So one of the next things that I want to do is go ahead and add in a new elevation because I want to get this sort of view coming together. So I'm going to go to View, Elevation, and I'm putting my elevation tag in place. Oh, I've done something wrong. There we go. I was using that one earlier as a test there. So let me drag this piece back. And again, I'm going to select that front arrow because I want to go ahead and drag this elevation marker back as well. Make it a little bit wider, and then I'm going to move the depth of that elevation all the way across the building. And so I have this elevation set up. So the first couple things you notice is I need to go ahead and hide these roofs that I was using as a tool to help guide my structure. Now, right off the bat, this elevation is fairly flat looking, so there's a couple of simple things that I want to do. The first is give it a little bit of a hit on line weight. This isn't a perfect fix, but it's remarkable how good it helps at just getting that initial take on line weight. So I'm going to go to Graphic Display Options, and on my silhouettes, I usually go ahead and set silhouettes all the way to a wide line. And you can see the difference that makes. You need to make sure that thin lines is turned off right here. The difference that makes is pretty remarkable. And so what it's going to do is it's really going to punch up the outside edges of objects. So you can see that's it's giving you a thinner line here, a wider line around any of the outside edges. And that goes a long way to begin sort of punching up the line weights and depth of field. So the next thing we're going to do is add in a little bit of shadow. So I'm going to turn that on. And I need to go ahead and begin building this curtain wall that's going to go in front here as well. So we'll add that piece in next. So I'm going to go to level 1. And it's probably a good time to start hiding that piece. And what that was simply the background drawing template. And so I'm going to go to Architecture, Wall, and start putting in this curtain wall line type. Now, I don't want to use the storefront. The storefront automatically puts in mullions, and I really want control over the mullions. So the type I usually like to start with is curtain wall 1. And I'm going to go from the center of this column, I hope. For some reason, I'm not picking up the midpoint on the center, so I'm going to build a really quick guide for that, just by using the annotate detail lines. Let me just put in a line that's going to come across to right here, and hopefully that'll give me a midpoint that I can use to begin putting in this curtain wall. So I'll delete those here in just a little bit. So I'm going to my curtain wall, that midpoint line, and I want that glazing to happen to the outside edge of my midpoint line. So I'm going to snap from here to here. I'm going to do the same thing from this element over. Again, I'm I'm going to have to build a quick guide for that so I can locate the midpoint of the column. And then what I'm going to put in next is a curtain wall along an arc from this point to this point, and I want to build an arc that's coming in with about a 30-foot radius, just like that. Now you'll note that that does not actually curve the glass yet, so if we look at that in 3D, you can see that that's a straight line. It's not going to curve it until I begin dividing glass into pieces. Essentially, Revit is saying, no, I cannot do a great big curved piece of glass. We need to actually use the mullions to drive the curve. So before I even add that in, though, I'm going to go ahead and select my glass pieces and attach them to the roof. So we should see that coming together. And now what I'm going to do is go to Architecture, Curtain Grid, and we'll divide the midpoints. And you can see how that's beginning to build that curve in for me by building segments. And now I want to start adding in the curtain grids at essentially 3, 1, another curtain grid 4 feet above that, and that's going to give me, actually we'll do 3, 11 above that. That's going to create a 7-foot high door right here. I'm going to do one more closer to the top. We'll offset this guy about 8 feet above the previous ones. And then what I want to do is add a few subdivisions on these side pieces of glass as well. I'm going to switch this to a different view type. Hopefully we can see it just a little bit better. Architecture, curtain grid. So I'm going to add one more curtain grid here. Sort of do a halfway point. Something like that. So what I can begin to do now is say mullion, all grid lines, that piece, and that piece. So the area that's not working just right yet that we'll need to worry about going back to fix later is certainly this, because there's sort of 2 mullions set here, but I'm not going to worry about that for right now. But what I do want to do is there isn't a mullion across here, and that's because I haven't offset these side pieces of glazing yet. So let's go ahead and select that. I'm going to set my base offset at 3 feet. And let's go ahead and move those grid lines down. So that piece should be right about like that. Then I'm going to do the same thing with this piece of glass here. Base offset of 3 feet. That's just an indicator that's letting me know it is going to delete a few mullions, which I'm totally okay with. I'll set that to 2, not 20. Rats. 2 and 2. So I'm beginning to build a pattern up like that. If I move that to my elevation that I have set up, can now see that I'm starting to really see this piece come together. Not too happy with how the shadow's falling across that though right now. I'd like that to be a little bit shallower. So let's go ahead and go to our sun settings, graphic display options, shadows, and lighting. Let's change this in-session lighting, sun from the top left. Let's change the altitude to about 20 degrees. So it's essentially setting the sun a little bit lower. It gives me a slightly different view. And now I'm beginning to have more of a presentation elevation put together for this particular project. So you can see I've got a hatch pattern built in, I've got a little bit of line weight built in, and one thing that I definitely need is some kind of heavier line weight across the bottom. So to add that in, I'm going to go to Annotate, Detail Lines, Wide Line. I'm just going to put a wide line in right across the base to tie all of that together. I certainly need to add in additional detail for how the structure is connecting. I need to modify this column to run up along the side of this. I need to build a new mullion type to sort of seam those things together, or at least a custom component to start doing that. But this is a pretty good starting point for it right now. So the last piece that I'm going to do is export this as a PDF file type. So to do that, I'm going to go to the big R, print, and my PDF writer of choice is called Qt PDF. You can certainly use Adobe PDF, but a lot of people out there I know don't have Adobe Acrobat Pro, which you need to actually write a PDF file. So Qt PDF is a piece of freeware out that generates a PDF format, and it works really just every bit as good as Adobe Acrobat. You don't have the editing portion of it. It's really just a PDF printer is all that is. So I'm going to use current window. I'm going to go ahead and set this up as a 11 by 17. I'm not going to worry about the scale right now. Let's just keep it together without a scale. So I'm going to go ahead and use fit to page. I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to go ahead and run a preview. And now I have sort of a rough version of how that's going to work. And I'm ready to print and say OK. And that is going to build my final PDF file. Then I can import that PDF file into Photoshop and begin adding Entourage.